The moment she walked into the gym, you could feel the shift in the air. Caitlin Clark didn't arrive with a press conference, a speech, or some grand declaration about her return. She simply stepped onto the court, laced up her shoes, and started playing basketball again. Yet somehow that quiet return carried more weight than any headline the league had produced in months. The city of Indianapolis had already embraced her long before draft night, long before the sold-out arenas and viral highlights, and Clark has said many times that she felt that love from the beginning. But what happened during that Team USA practice went far beyond fan appreciation. It happened while the WNBA itself was standing at a crossroads, locked in one of the most intense labor negotiations in the league's history. Veterans were publicly debating salary structures. Ownership groups were calculating the financial future of the sport, and the possibility of a delayed season hung in the air like a storm cloud. In the middle of all that tension, Clark showed up smiling, joking about food poisoning, and casually turning a routine practice session into the most watched basketball clip on the internet that day. The backdrop made the moment even more surreal. Clark had been away from competitive basketball for months. For nearly 8 long months, she had been forced to watch from the sidelines as injuries interrupted what was supposed to be a defining season. First came the groin injury, then the bone bruise that ultimately ended her campaign earlier than anyone expected. She played only 13 games during the 2025 WNBA season, a year that was supposed to cement her place as the most exciting young player in the league. Instead, she spent the summer rehabbing while the Indiana Fever tried to navigate life without the player who had transformed the franchise overnight. The numbers she posted in those 13 appearances were still remarkable: 16, 5 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds per game, even though she was clearly playing through pain. But the real story was what happened when she disappeared from the lineup. Television ratings began to wobble. Casual fans who had discovered the league during her rookie explosion slowly drifted away. Sponsors quietly asked questions about long-term audience growth. Executives who had been celebrating the sport's sudden popularity began wondering whether that momentum could survive without its most magnetic star on the floor. That was why the moment Clark's name appeared on the Team USA training camp roster, the internet erupted. It wasn't just a roster announcement. It felt like a signal that the league's biggest draw was finally back. Her return to training camp at Duke University months earlier had already generated buzz, but the Miami session carried a different kind of anticipation. This was the first time fans believed they might truly see the old Caitlin Clark again, the fearless shooter launching deep threes without hesitation, the playmaker who could thread impossible passes through traffic, the competitor whose confidence bordered on audacity. Clark admitted afterward that she was nervous stepping back into a competitive practice environment after so much time away. 8 months is an eternity for an athlete whose rhythm depends on constant repetition. Her lungs needed to catch up, she said. The game's speed felt different at first. But the moment the ball touched her hands, something familiar returned. Within minutes, she buried a corner 3. Teammates laughed as she pushed the pace in transition. The rhythm that had made her a phenomenon in college and a sensation in the pros resurfaced almost instantly. The rust was there, she acknowledged that openly, but the instincts had never left. The vision was still razor-sharp. The confidence was still unmistakable. Watching her play again felt less like a comeback and more like a reminder, as if she were quietly telling the basketball world that nothing about her game had actually disappeared. She had simply been waiting. Standing only a few feet away during that practice was another star whose name had been connected to Clark in a very different way months earlier, Kelsey Plum. Their relationship had once been surrounded by awkward headlines and viral debate. During the previous All-Star weekend, Plum had made a comment about players attending a meeting connected to the union's salary negotiations, joking that none of the athletes on Clark's roster had shown up. The remark spread instantly across sports media, interpreted by many as a public jab directed at the league's most famous rookie. Clark's enormous online following rushed to her defense, and for a brief moment the situation turned into a full-blown news cycle. Plum later clarified that the comment had been meant as humor that simply landed badly, and she apologized. Still, the moment had revealed the deeper tension simmering inside the league. Plum wasn't just another player. She was the vice president of the WNBA Players Association, one of the union's most visible leaders during a heated collective bargaining fight. When she spoke, people listened, and when her words appeared to challenge Clark, many fans interpreted it as a signal of deeper divisions. Clark never responded publicly. She didn't post on social media, didn't criticize anyone in interviews, didn't escalate the drama. She simply stayed quiet. Months passed, the controversy faded, and then suddenly the two players found themselves walking into the same Team USA practice facility. Instead of cold stares or tense silence, the first interaction between them was surprisingly ordinary. Plum noticed Clark entering behind her in the locker room area, turned around, smiled, and playfully pinched her side. Clark laughed. That was it. No statements, no public reconciliation tour, no dramatic explanation for the cameras. Two elite competitors just showed up to work and acted like professionals. What followed was the kind of unscripted moment that social media loves. During one drill, Clark jokingly told teammates she had food poisoning while still firing passes across the court at full speed. Plum chased one of those passes down, laughing as the ball zipped past defenders. At another point, Clark took a shot instead of passing, prompting Plum to jokingly call her selfish. Clark fired back immediately, teasing Plum about missing a catch. The entire exchange lasted only seconds, but cameras captured everything. Within hours, the clip spread across sports websites, podcasts, and social platforms around the world. Millions of people watched two of the league's biggest names laughing together at practice, a sharp contrast to the tense headlines dominating basketball news at the time. The timing made the moment almost impossible to ignore. While those clips were going viral, the WNBA was approaching a critical deadline in negotiations over a new collective bargaining agreement. The league and the players' union had been negotiating for more than a year. Proposals had moved back and forth between both sides, each attempting to define the economic future of women's professional basketball. The union wanted a larger share of league revenue, a dramatic increase in the salary cap, fully guaranteed contracts, and improvements to travel conditions and other benefits. Ownership groups, on the other hand, argued that the financial structure of the league required a different approach. Their offer focused on sharing a large percentage of net revenue while maintaining a lower salary cap that reflected current operating realities. The numbers were far apart, and everyone involved understood that reaching a compromise would be difficult. The league set a target date for an agreement, hoping to finalize the framework before the upcoming season began. If that deadline passed without progress, the start of the new season could be delayed, a scenario that would create enormous uncertainty for teams, players, and sponsors alike. Against that tense backdrop, the most famous player in the sport wasn't sitting at the negotiating table or giving fiery interviews about revenue percentages. She was on a practice court in Miami launching deep three-pointers and joking with teammates. The contrast between the seriousness of the negotiations and the joy of that practice session felt almost symbolic. Clark did eventually comment on the negotiations, but her words were surprisingly simple compared to the intense rhetoric surrounding the debate. When reporters asked her about the situation, she didn't deliver a long speech about financial models or union strategy. Instead, she said she didn't understand why both sides couldn't just sit down in a room, talk through their differences, and shake hands when they found a solution. It was a straightforward answer, almost disarmingly calm considering the magnitude of the discussion. Yet that comment captured something that many fans had been thinking quietly for months, that beneath all the statistics, business projections, and political positioning, the sport itself still revolved around the players stepping onto the court and playing the game. In that sense, the practice session in Miami became more than a routine workout. It turned into a snapshot of the entire moment the league was living through. On one side, there were negotiations about contracts, revenue shares, and the future structure of professional women's basketball. On the other side, there was Caitlin Clark, finally healthy again, laughing with Kelsey Plum while draining threes and reminding everyone why people had fallen in love with the game in the first place. The cameras captured both realities at once, a league wrestling with its economic identity and a player whose presence had already reshaped the conversation. That is why so many people looked at that practice clip and felt something bigger than a simple highlight. It wasn't just about Clark making shots or Plum joking back at her. It was about the return of the player who had ignited unprecedented interest in the league and the quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful statement an athlete can make isn't spoken in a boardroom or printed in a contract proposal. Sometimes it happens when they pick up a basketball after months away, smile, and start playing again while the entire sports world watches. That's how business works. You look each other in the eye, you shake hands, and you respect both sides. When Caitlin Clark said those words, they traveled across the sports world faster than anyone expected. Not because they were aggressive, not because they were controversial, but because they were the most calm, reasonable, and surprisingly honest thing anyone connected to the WNBA negotiations had said in months. In a time when headlines were filled with leaked letters, tense negotiations, and public disagreements about money, Clark's statement landed like a splash of cold water. She didn't attack the players' union. She didn't defend the league owners. She didn't try to position herself as a hero in the middle of the conflict. Instead, she said something almost painfully simple. Both sides should sit down in the same room and work it out. No lawyers passing messages back and forth. No dramatic public statements. No social media campaigns trying to sway public opinion. Just people in a room solving the problem so the season could move forward and the game itself could stay at the center of the conversation. That moment became a headline everywhere. And what made it so powerful was not just the quote itself. It was the timing. Because while Clark was calmly talking about shaking hands and getting a deal done, the WNBA was living through one of the most complicated business moments in its entire history. Behind the scenes, the league and the players' union had been negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement for more than a year. The discussions weren't small or symbolic. They were about the financial structure of women's professional basketball moving forward. To understand the tension, you have to look at the numbers. The WNBA had just entered the most explosive growth period in its history. A new media rights deal signed in 2024 was valued at roughly $2 billion spread across multiple years. Major media companies like NBC and Amazon had stepped in with significant broadcasting commitments. That deal alone represented the largest television agreement the sport had ever seen. Viewership numbers were rising as well. The regular season audience averaged close to 1 million viewers per game, a massive increase compared to previous seasons. For the first time, women's basketball wasn't just attracting loyal fans, it was pulling in casual sports viewers who had never watched the league before. The expansion plans were even more dramatic. 2 new franchises, the Toronto Tempo and the Portland Fire, were preparing to enter the league. Each ownership group paid roughly $250 million just to join. That meant $500 million in expansion fees pouring into the WNBA ecosystem from investors who clearly believed the league's future was bright. By every financial indicator, women's professional basketball was growing faster than it ever had. But the tension came from a simple reality. Player salaries had not grown at the same pace. At the time, the maximum WNBA salary sat a little above $200,000 per year. They came because players like Aya Wilson, Angel Reese, Paige Buchers, and Breanna Stewart were producing incredible basketball. When the news cycle focused entirely on business disputes, casual fans simply tuned out. When the conversation returned to the court, the audience returned instantly. Even Kelsey Plum's presence at that practice carried deeper meaning than many people realized. Plum wasn't just another player in the gym. She was the first vice president of the WNBA Players Association, a key figure in the union's leadership structure. She had been deeply involved in negotiations. She understood the stakes. And yet there she was, laughing alongside Clark in front of cameras instead of delivering another fiery speech about bargaining positions. That choice sent a quiet message. The most visible stars in the league did not want the story of women's basketball to become a prolonged labor war. They wanted progress. They wanted fair compensation. But they also wanted the game itself to remain the center of attention. As negotiations continued, the future of the upcoming season still hung in the balance. Free agency, the expansion draft, and the upcoming college draft all depended on the new agreement. Teams were preparing. Players were waiting. Fans were watching closely. But regardless of how long negotiations would take, one thing had already become clear during that practice week. The most powerful force in women's basketball was not a contract clause or a revenue percentage. It was the game itself. When Caitlin Clark stepped onto that practice court, healthy and smiling after months away, the energy around the sport changed instantly. Fans came back. Highlights exploded across the internet. And for a moment, the entire conversation shifted away from boardrooms and back to the hardwood floor. That single practice session proved something the entire basketball world needed to remember. The growth of the WNBA is powered by the product on the court. Players competing, shots falling, teammates laughing, fans watching. When those things happen, the momentum of women's basketball becomes unstoppable. And sometimes it only takes a few minutes of Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Plum joking around on a practice court to remind everyone exactly why the sport captured the world's attention in the first place. But the story didn't end with that one practice, and the deeper you look at the situation, the more revealing the entire moment becomes. What happened in Miami was not just a viral clip or a lighthearted exchange between two elite guards. It was a window into the future direction of women's basketball and the complicated reality of a league that is suddenly growing faster than anyone predicted. For decades, the WNBA fought for visibility, attention, and financial stability. There were years when games struggled to attract national coverage, when arenas were only partially filled, and when the broader sports audience treated the league as a niche product rather than a major professional sport. That reality has changed dramatically in just a few seasons, and much of that transformation can be traced back to a new generation of players who brought an entirely different level of excitement and cultural impact to the game. Caitlin Clark became the most obvious symbol of that shift, but she was not alone. Paige Buchers, Aya Wilson, Angel Reese, Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, and many others helped turn women's basketball into something that felt urgent, entertaining, and impossible to ignore. Their highlights flooded social media, their rivalries fueled debate shows, and their personalities gave fans something to connect with beyond just the box score. By the time Clark entered the league, millions of new viewers had already been primed to pay attention. What made Clark unique was the way she accelerated that momentum almost overnight. Her shooting range stretched the geometry of the court in ways that reminded people of the most electrifying shooters in the NBA, and her willingness to take big shots in big moments created a sense of unpredictability that casual fans love. Every time she pulled up from the logo, every time she threaded a no-look pass through traffic, the reaction online was immediate. Clips traveled across platforms, new audiences discovered the sport, and suddenly the WNBA was not just a league fighting for relevance, it was a league experiencing genuine cultural momentum. That surge of attention created enormous opportunities, but it also created pressure. Growth in professional sports always forces difficult conversations about money, structure, and power. When new television deals appear, when expansion teams pay hundreds of millions of dollars to join the league, and when corporate sponsors begin investing heavily in the product, every stakeholder wants to understand how that new value will be divided. Players want a larger share because they're the talent people pay to watch. Owners want financial sustainability because building a league requires long-term investment and infrastructure. Networks want compelling content that keeps audiences engaged. And fans, perhaps the most important group in the entire equation, simply want the games to continue without interruption. That is why the practice in Miami resonated so strongly with people who follow the sport closely. It represented a moment where the noise of negotiation temporarily faded and the pure essence of basketball returned to the spotlight. Clark was not delivering speeches about financial models. Plum was not arguing about revenue percentages. They were competing, laughing, challenging each other, and reminding everyone that the foundation of the entire business is the game itself. The irony is that those few minutes of unscripted interaction probably did more to strengthen the league's public image than any official statement issued during the negotiation process. Fans watching those clips did not feel tension or conflict. They felt excitement about the upcoming season. They saw chemistry between two players who had once been portrayed as rivals. They saw a glimpse of what Team USA might look like when the World Championships arrive. Most importantly, They saw a sport that looked fun again after weeks of headlines dominated by legal language and financial disputes. That shift in perception matters more than many executives realize, because modern sports audiences are extremely sensitive to tone. When a league appears divided,